Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Marcus Vargas, and as always, guys, a jam-packed show for you today. So, well, actually, before I start, I just want to say I hope you guys are all doing well. I hope you are all healthy and safe, as always, but, oh my goodness, I can't just help but be excited. As many of you know, I am a Chiefs fan. I've been a Chiefs fan for as long as I can remember. I do live in Philadelphia. I've said this plenty of times. I know people think it's blasphemous. How could I not be an Eagles fan? I don't know, but I am not. My father, he immigrated to this country when he was in his teens. He's from Colombia. And, the Chiefs were the team that he chose. He saw a documentary about them on TV. It's actually one of the first things he saw when coming to this country. He thought they were cool. He said the Chiefs are my favorite team and yada yada, it gets passed down. So that's how I'm a Chiefs fan. Well. I'm used to us being the talk of the town right now. I'm not going to lie. Going to have to gloat a bit here because we did win that Super Bowl. Got to enjoy it while it lasts because, it is a fleeting moment and it is very hard to repeat. So, I'm not going to, take this moment for granted. Anyway, our quarterback, who is already in 3 years a Super Bowl MVP, a league MVP, just got the contract of a lifetime. And, you guys already know the details, but the contract extension was for 10 years. And at first, people were thinking, oh, this might be worth, it has to be in the range of, it has to be at least $300 to $400 million. Well, since it's Patrick Mahomes and he does things crazy and he's just that amazing, that contract is worth it could possibly be worth up to $503 million. Now, this is absolutely insane. When I got the notification on my phone, I'm not going to lie to you guys, I was super excited. I didn't have a bad knee-jerk reaction like some people might have about the money. But this essentially is a 12-year deal because he still has 2 years left on his contract. So he is with the team for a very, very long time. It is a huge commitment. Like I said, it's worth up to $500 million. We've never seen a contract like this, in the NFL. And, Mahomes is a quarterback unlike one we've seen in the NFL. He's absolutely amazing. Of course, you can compare him, but his resume is pretty outstanding. Now, for those who, think that, this was a bad move by the Chiefs, it is pretty insane to think about. This is something we've never seen before. To think about a guy getting $500 million on an NFL team, you basically just automatically assume, oh, well, that team's going down the drain. They're not going to have anyone because, this is actually more team-friendly than you might think. Right, and one of the first things that actually came to mind when I saw this deal was this is perfect. This is exactly, I didn't say it on the show here, so I can't actually take credit for it. You can think I'm lying. But I had conversations with people, and I said, what if they just sign, what if teams, it wasn't just about Mahomes, the teams just started signing guys to 10-year contracts, like super long extensions so that you get the yearly salary, to where they want it, but you can spread it out over a bunch of time, or you can lower the yearly salaries you're giving people, but for bigger total contracts in the end. Well, he did both, because the contract ends up being around $40 to $45 million a year, which is also the highest yearly salary, which is pretty insane over that 10-year span. So it's absolutely wild. I thought they would maybe do one or the other, highest yearly or highest contract ever, and they did both. So it's pretty insane. But to think about it, when later down the road, a few years into this contract, I believe that this contract is going to look very average. I think by the time, he, plays even into half of this contract, maybe halfway down this contract, quarterbacks are going to be making $40 to $50 million a year, and that'll be the standard. So Patrick Mahomes' deal will look very, very team friendly, because quarterbacks who clearly aren't as good as Patrick Mahomes will be, will have the same yearly salary. It's just insane because, he's the first one to get there, first one to take a deal like this. And, it's not like the entire contract is guaranteed. You have to remember that, right? Actually, off the top of my head, I don't know what exactly the guarantees were. It was 100 and some million, 140 million, I think, like that. 140 million of the, total massive 477 to 503. The numbers are very, you hear a lot of things, and the contract, like we said, was 100 and some pages, or, as we've heard. So it's pretty insane. There's so much to unpack. And when you look at it, it's not just, simple guarantees, because there's 141 million that's guaranteed, but then there's, that's the injury, guarantee. And then there's like 300 more million that can possibly guaranteed to him through, like performance bonuses, roster bonuses, crazy things. So he could end up making, almost the entire contract. It's actually pretty insane. I actually really like the idea of this because, yes, he's getting a crap ton of money guaranteed, and he hasn't even, done anything yet. I'm not saying he hasn't done anything yet to earn this contract, but, he's just signing his name on the paper, ton of money. But when you make these performance based, or, it's incentivized by your performance, I think it's very, very interesting, right? Because you literally play up to your contract. We've seen so many times where, players get this massive contract and they severely dip in production. So it's sort of interesting to have these mechanisms, as they've called them. I haven't actually looked into them specifically because the news broke very recently, but it's very, very interesting to think about, performance mechanisms for a guy who is that good, going out there and earning his contract. It's very, very interesting. A lot of people have speculated, he's not going to play throughout the, he's not going to play the full contract through, which it makes sense. It's hard to see, especially a guy like Mahomes playing a full 10 years with one contract. He's just absolutely amazing. And the one thing that is not concerning, but the one thing that is very interesting is an interesting question to ask, I should say, is that what makes this contract worth it, right? Because Patrick Mahomes now, NFL MVP, like I said, he brought a Super Bowl to the Chiefs that they hadn't had in 50 years, right? 50 or 60 years, but 50 years, I believe. Yes, it was the 60th anniversary of the franchise, I believe, 50 years since they got a Super Bowl. Absolutely insane, that he can do this at such a young age, such a young tenure with the team, and now he earns his contract for that. So now it feels like, what does Mahomes have to do so that we don't say the Chiefs are overpaying for him? Well, honestly, guys, he just has to continue being himself, right? Because I think right now he is worth that. I don't think the Chiefs paid him for what they think he can do. I think they paid him for what he's done and what he is, right? I think, of course, they all think that, Mahomes is only going to get better, but if he continues to play at this level, he's going to win so many Super Bowls, it's going to be hard to count, right? He's going to be rivaling Tom Brady. And certainly, what kind of check would you write for that, right? If at this point, if you're writing a check for $500 million for one Super Bowl, what would you do if he won 2, 3, 4? And I honestly think that if he wins another Super Bowl in the next couple of years, then the contract is already worth it, right? I don't want to put, a Super Bowl win is invaluable, right? And so it's hard to sort of compare money value to Super Bowl value, because I think a Super Bowl win is actually priceless. It's insane how difficult it is to get to and win the Super Bowl, and let alone win multiple Super Bowls, right? Some of the greatest players to ever play the game of football never even won a Super Bowl. Same goes for other sports as well. But it's crazy because of, how many players are on the team. Not one player can take over a team and sort of lead them to a Super Bowl as easily as some other sports. And so I think, this deal is worth it. I think they've changed the game, and I think that's one of the things that I wanted to touch on, especially, is that other players now are going to be thanking Mahomes because now this opens the door for other quarterbacks, other leaders of teams, when their times come for their contract extension. Their agents are going to be like, look at this deal that Kansas City did with Patrick Mahomes. I'm thinking we do something like that, right? And so I think it's revolutionizing the sport, and I think we are going to see more contracts like this. Maybe not 10 years, but I could see certain contracts, 7, 8-year extensions, stretching the size of the contract over a big period of time, so that the deal is more team friendly while the player is making a ton of money as well. It's pretty insane. I think one of the most interesting things as well, which a couple of people have talked about as being one of the biggest concerns, Mahomes' deal. So just to make this just clear cut and basic. In 2023, he's set to make a certain money, right? And he's set to have a guaranteed amount of money. Well, that money becomes guaranteed in 2021. And then in 2024, that compensation is guaranteed in 2022. And 2025 is guaranteed in 2023, et cetera, et cetera. It's very, very interesting. And the problem with this is, should Mahomes get injured in 2021, knock on wood, God forbid, of course, they still have to pay. They're on the hook for that money for the next 2 years. So this is one of the biggest leaps of faith, the biggest symbols of trust that I've ever seen in the league. And that's why I really like the deal too. I'm looking at it, I know a lot of people, they're analyzing it, looking at it, from an outside perspective. I'm looking at it from, a Chiefs fan perspective right now, right in this moment here. And I'm saying for a player and an organization to make that kind of commitment to each other says a ton about both of them, right? It's pretty insane that, such a young kid, huge future. Of course, he could end up on any team he wanted to. Any team would want Patrick Mahomes. To make that commitment, to sort of make the commitment of a lifetime, because it feels like now, basically, Mahomes is going to be a Chief for life. And for the organization to do that as well, it's really, really special. We see America's favorite team having trouble making any sort of commitment to the quarterback they have right now. The quarterback that they say they believe in, the quarterback they want to lead them, apparently. They can't even figure out a deal for 5 years. And so this is definitely going to put pressure on the Cowboys. Let's just segue into that. This deal here is going to make the Dak and Jerry Jones deal very, very interesting. That whole situation was already interesting, already tense. And now I think the Cowboys have, a week? The Cowboys might have only, it's like a week and a couple of days to figure this deal out. Now with Mahomes doing this, Dak Prescott's going to kick open the door and say, give me $600 million over 10 years or else, right? And who knows what happens. He's going to play this year on the deal. I honestly, this might be the worst thing that could have happened for Jerry Jones, to see this kind of massive deal happen, because I think now you're going to see Dak Prescott certainly wanting $40 million, because, Patrick Mahomes' deal right now with $45 million a year. And I think, Russell Wilson's at $35 million a year. He'll be smack dab in the middle, so that he's not the highest paid, even though he's next in line, because the weird structure of the NFL, which sometimes I don't like, when one guy gets a contract, the next man up usually just gets paid more than him just because he's the next man up. Not, specifically because he's better or he's worse, but because, this is market value, and right now I'm a great player and I want a little bit more than the market value. So it's pretty interesting. This whole thing was very, very cool. I think it's going to be very, very interesting when we see these next guys, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, when their times come for their extension, I'm really interested to see what other teams do to build off of this, or if they don't, well, then they don't. But I think it's a really, really cool opportunity for players to secure lifetimes of money, and really feel valued, because I think this, the Chiefs clearly value this, or they think, Patrick Mahomes is priceless, right? And so they're just doing anything they can to keep him for as long as possible. So it's super, super cool. Hopefully we see other players take advantage of this, and I hope, this certainly revolutionizes the game and how we think about NFL contracts, right? Because one thing that people usually say when they talk about this is these are baseball numbers, right? Baseball players get paid tons and tons and tons of money. It's cool to see it sort of coming into the NFL, because these players truly deserve this kind of money, especially the young ones who are exceeding their expectations, especially guys like Patrick Mahomes, like Lamar Jackson. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And just to comment on Lamar Jackson, I do wonder what would be interesting. I mean, what would happen when Lamar Jackson, his contract situation comes up, because he's a completely different type of quarterback who takes more shots and has a bit more, risk involved with his health. I wonder if the Ravens would make that kind of commitment. I don't believe so. But I honestly would love to see it, because it also builds more of a loyalty to the team, loyalty to the city, shows how much that player loves to play for that team. And it's just all around great for football and the fan base, right? So it's very, 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 very cool. I wanted to talk about that. I might talk about it more. It gives me opportunity to talk about my boy, talk about the Cowboys and how they're lacking and slacking with Dak Prescott's contract. But with that, guys, we'll go into our first break. And when we get back, some more talk about how the coronavirus is affecting the NFL and some questionable decisions or proposals by the NFLPA. All right, so stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Talking about Patrick Mahomes, the richest man in football. And now I want to move on to talk about something a bit less fun, right? I've talked about coronavirus recently. I'm going to keep talking about it as long as it's an issue, as long as it, affects football. It's going to be affecting football for quite some time, so hope you're not tired of it already. I need to talk about it. It's relevant. It affects us all. So, one thing, people have certainly talked about a lot is the effect that coronavirus might have on the league's, economic situation. It's going to lower the salary cap, or, owners going to be making less money. It's just going to affect how much players can be paid, yada, 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 et cetera, et cetera. It makes sense, right? When, fans can't go to games, league's making much, much, much less money, clearly. Even, they added that, other postseason team. That's one less postseason team with tickets. They're talking about, adding the other game. So it's very, very interesting to see, not only is coronavirus, just affecting us, with just not having the dang sports, but it could possibly affect the players' money, which is very, very unfortunate. Well, I want to talk about some interesting news. Tom Pelissero tweeted this out. The NFLPA informed its Board of Representatives today that the NFL proposed 35% of player salaries be held in escrow to help manage costs during the 2020 season, per sources. It's one option on the table if revenue is impacted league-wide by COVID-19. I'm going to read that again, or at least part of it. The NFL proposed 35% of player salaries be held in escrow to help manage costs during the 2020 season. It sucks because I was just talking about a team that, really put value in their player, really basically made him, seem priceless, can't put a number on it, this huge contract, it's great for football, great for him, great for the team. And then we get something like this because, of course, this is one of the biggest jokes I've seen in quite a while. And it's honestly quite disrespectful. If you think about this for a second, you have 32 owners of these NFL teams who are billionaires, 100 millionaires, make insane amounts of money off of the backs of these players, off of their talents, off of their star power, off of their off-the-field actions and generosities and things of that nature. And you want to hold some of their salaries to help manage costs during the 2020 season. This basically, let me put this in a different perspective. Your boss calls you into work, but he says, I'm only going to pay you half of what you make because coronavirus has really been affecting my sales. And I need you to work, but I'm only going to pay you half. I mean, come on. I mean, of course it's not half, it's 35%, but still. I really don't understand this. Also, just to think about this, 35% to a bench player, making minimum salary is ridiculous. When you compare it to 35% of a guy, making $30 million a year, right? That guy, $30 million a year, you're still going to have $20 million. 35% of $100,000, $35,000, you're left with $65,000. It just doesn't make any sense to me. This is just absolutely ridiculous. And I'm glad countless players have been on social media just clowning this whole thing. Patrick Mahomes, Michael Thomas, they've all reacted to it. The NFLPA executive Don Davis told players on a conference call, basically, we told them to kick rocks. And that's exactly what they should have told them because that is the craziest thing I've ever seen. These owners have so much money, because the owners are losing money, that shouldn't affect the players at all, right? The owners should be planning for things like this. The owners should have mechanisms in place to be ready for things like this to happen. I don't understand how we get to this point and the owners think that holding the players' salaries is even an acceptable idea. Not even putting it into action. Michael Thomas, you guys know he's active on social media. He said, laugh out loud, everyone will sit out and not play until they get their stuff together before we do this. Patrick Mahomes, one of the bigger voices of the league at this time, says, bro, what? With 3 laughing emojis. Allen Robinson posts a funny GIF. Taylor Lewan, if this happens, we need an entirely new player association. Kenny Vaccaro, I'm big chillin'. Everybody's just clowning this thing, and it makes sense. I really don't understand why they would even think about this, but it just goes to show you that the players aren't valued as they should be. And it's a shame. It's a shame because these players, the league doesn't exist without these players. And I understand, right? These players, this is their job to go out there and play football, but it's much, much bigger than that. It's not just about this being their job. We know as fans of the sport that it is not just a sport. It's not just something to watch. It's not just a game. So it sucks to see these players aren't valued more. Even after seeing, with the collective bargaining agreement, players not getting everything they need or want, and just to see this even being an idea, it's just a joke. It's basically, what makes it more upsetting to me is too that these players are, they're not playing just for funsies, right? They're playing because they love the sport. They love their teammates. They love their team. They want to go compete, and they're providing something, providing an escape for us, and also they're going to make a living. But with that comes the risk of possibly catching coronavirus, right? You're basically telling these players, hey, listen, we're losing a ton of money. Fans can't come to our games. So we need you to risk your lives, basically, right? Because the coronavirus kills people. It doesn't matter what you think about the coronavirus, how you've been affected by it. If you have been affected by it, I hope for speedy recoveries. My prayers to you guys. Wouldn't wish that upon anyone, but the coronavirus is killing people. So these players, no matter how healthy they are risking their lives, potentially the lives of their family members who they come in contact with, to come play a sport that they love and enjoy and to make their living, while the owners don't do anything. They're not risking anything. They sit in their, sit in their skybox seats. They fly in their private jets. They're not risking anything because they actually don't have to come in contact with anyone or other players. These players literally have to be touching each other all the time. And after all that, they want the players to give to let them take 35% of their salaries. So I just I really don't understand this. It's actually absurd. You would think that actually there would be some sort of hazard pay bonus that players would get because they're going out and helping the NFL make money in this horrible time where everyone's quarantined and nothing is going on and so many people are losing money and so many people are out of work. But no, their idea was to ask the players to give them money. So I like I said, guys, I'm kind of speechless. Actually, I'm not speechless, but more so just shocked. Because I do have a lot to say, but it is very, very shocking because especially at this time, it's just so distasteful to even make that sort of proposal when the political climate is so fragile as it is right now, where the NFL is under this microscope. You would think that they would put the players first in everything that they do, but still they've shown us that they haven't really learned anything, and they only really do things when they're pressured by social media or big movements or basically the masses. When they're pressured by the masses to do something in their fans, I guess then, it's okay to make change. But this is a joke. This is a travesty. I really hope they should apologize for even making that assumption. Hopefully there was some sort of miscommunication because, this is through sources, right? Tom Pelissero tweeted it, but he did say, per sources. Hopefully somebody got something wrong. Hopefully, they talk about a 35% bonus for these players. But this is really messed up. And if that even becomes a thing, we for sure are not having a season, right? There's no way these players go out there and play knowing that a third of their salaries are being held because the owners don't want to give up any of their money. There's not a chance. So things right now are really not in the best place for the NFL because, with the coronavirus spreading like it is right now, like I talked about, last episode, there still are huge problems with coronavirus. How much it's spreading because so many people are going out because the states are going to yellow/green phases, but still it's still out there and people are being very careless with that happening. And now with this happening, talking about taking player salaries, I really wouldn't be surprised if we didn't have a season. I'd be hurt. Let me tell you, I'd be hurt, man. I'd be sad. But at this rate, the NFL, they've been so slow and so quiet talking about it. Talking about if they're gonna, cut the preseason completely. Not really talking about, what they're gonna do about the whole season. They're not trying to make that decision, that tough decision. But doing stuff like this, just come on. You're not even making the players want to come back and play. Disappointed by the NFL, but nothing new, I suppose, right? I hope if we do have a season, though, I would like to add that, yes, I don't want this to happen, but I do understand that the NFL holding it in escrow, right? This doesn't necessarily mean that the NFL is going to take their money and go spend it, right? It's basically delaying paying the players, and I think, of course, you don't want to confuse the two, right? But at the same time, it shouldn't be happening at all, and I think that's what you need to take away from this. no players should be, have any of their money taken away. When the owners are literally billionaires. When everyday businesses and local businesses have to deal with these sorts of things, they don't take the salaries of their workers. Neither should the NFL. Shouldn't even have been an idea. Right? And so, while I understand, yes, they're not saying, we need you to help pay salaries, et cetera, the owner should never be touching the players' money. Right? This is, because they are so rich, because they make so much money off of the players. Right? Because yes, these players get, these contracts, these huge contracts that they earn and they deserve, but their value is actually priceless, right? Who's just, who can tell, just how much that player is actually worth, right? Because somebody can get a $150 million contract over 5 years, right? Or let's say 4 years, $150 million. That's what? Close to $40 million a year. But how much revenue does that person bring in if they're a star? All the fans that come to watch them every home game, 8 weeks out of the year, and for the playoff games and all that, how much money are they bringing in through the ticket sales? They don't get any of that money. So just a bad move. Just to wrap it up, just a bad move, bad idea. The NFL should really feel pretty embarrassed that this even got out. They should feel silly. Take it back as soon as possible. Get your players back on board. But anyway, guys, with that, we're going to go into our next break. And when we get back, we'll get back to some fantasy football, some must-own RBs that you should be paying attention to. So with that, guys, we'll get into our break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Alright guys, we're back here now with some fantasy football. I want to talk about some running backs. These are some must-own running backs. These are running backs you gotta be paying attention to. If you don't draft them, whatever. I'm not gonna get my feelings aren't gonna be hurt, but I do think that there are some guys you should be paying attention to. One of them, actually, the one I'm going to start out with is one that you might be shocked, because it's certainly he's been in the headlines for not the right reasons, not recently. I'm just saying in general, and hasn't been wowing anyone as of late. But David Johnson, yes, I know, David Johnson really hasn't done anything since 2016. On the field and for fantasy football. Now, in 2018, he had an okay season. It honestly really wasn't that great. But I guess for fantasy football, he did have 196.6 fantasy football points. Not the worst he could have possibly been, but certainly not 327 like he had a couple years before that. The reason why I'm talking about David Johnson is on the books for $13 million. I believe it's $13 million next season for, to play for Houston. Houston, as you know, got rid of DeAndre Hopkins. David Johnson is going as running back 18. Basically, being picked at the start of the 4th round which I do consider one of the earlier rounds. I guess rounds like 1, 2, 3/4, 1 to 4, I would say, are the early rounds. David Johnson is going to be the lead back in Houston. There's not a chance, I don't believe at least, that Houston is going to be wasting $13 million on David Johnson. I'm sorry. Shouldn't say wasting. They're not going to be spending $13 million on David Johnson to have him come be the secondary running back after letting go of DeAndre Hopkins. There's just not a shot. They believe in him somehow, some way. They believe that he can get back to form clearly. I'm not even saying that as a question. They have to believe it. There's no way they don't, or they wouldn't have made that deal, right? So he's going to be the lead guy. He's going to be catching passes and running the football, right? Because he can do both. I think Duke Johnson's going to have a significant dip in value. I really don't think he's going to have as much of a role as he did when Carlos Hyde was there. And now the one concern that you might have, yes, Carlos Hyde really didn't do much for fantasy football last season because he only had, I think it was like 9 points a game. He really didn't do much, and he really didn't catch that many passes. Well, David Johnson is basically Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson Jr. combined. He can do both. And so, Carlos Hyde barely had receptions last season. I think he had like 10. It's 10. Yes. 10 he had 10 receptions last season. And David Johnson, could certainly exceed 10. If you look at it, Duke Johnson, had 44 receptions on 62 targets last season for the Houston Texans. And I think David Johnson is going to take the majority of those. Plus, he's going to take the majority of the rushing snaps. And so, David Johnson is very, very, very interesting. I think you should be paying attention to him because of how late he's going in drafts. Everybody's out on him. So take advantage. As a backup for the Arizona Cardinals, David Johnson had 36 receptions last season. Now, I understand he really wasn't the backup until Kenyon Drake came in, but 36 receptions for a guy who's basically forgotten. 4 receiving touchdowns, 370 receiving yards. The rushing clearly wasn't there. He did pretty horrible, 3.7 yards per carry. But we're going to assume that he's fully healthy, and he's going to be, I know he's going to be the lead back. I'm not assuming that. He's going to be the lead back in Houston. So pay attention to David Johnson, guys. He's certainly a guy, especially if you already have 2 running backs, 3 running backs, take a chance on him. Take a chance on David Johnson on your bench because I think he has a lot of potential. And if you pick him up in the 3rd, in the 4th round, I think he's going to slip to the 4th round. If you pick him up in the 4th round and he turns out to be a quality starter, that is insane value because he's a guy who gives you PPR value as well. So pay attention to David Johnson, guys, because a lot of people are out on him. Nobody cares about David Johnson right now because of the disappointment he's been the past 2 seasons and how he hasn't been his 2016 self in quite some time. So, I know, pretty crazy, kind of a hot take, but I really think he's going to show out and have a big, big bounce back year. Another one I'm going to talk about here, another one who's basically, people's decision to draft him is hanging on the fact that he might not be healthy. Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, guys. I think Todd Gurley, another huge bounce back candidate next season. Him and David Johnson. If I had to pick running backs, 2 or 3 running backs, man, it'd be him, David Johnson, and I would say James Conner. It's tough though because Le'Veon Bell's a bounce back without the injury. I would say Le'Veon Bell, but he wasn't injured really. He just had a terrible offensive line last season. But anyway, Todd Gurley is just 2 years removed from being the best fantasy football running back. He was an absolute monster. 2017, he had 21 points a game. 2018, he has 22.4 points a game. Last season, he has 12.6, which also isn't terrible. It's not RB1 status or anything like that, but it's not terrible when you think about, they were talking about, his knee problems possibly ending his career, right? And so he ended as the RB14. I think he can certainly end up as an RB10 and up, RB1 in Atlanta. Todd Gurley, another guy that people aren't really drafting as high. He's going as the 14th overall running back at the start of the 3rd round. I believe that he can easily outperform that role, but I wouldn't take him, as one of my first 2 guys, clearly. And of course, you guys know the Christian McCaffreys, the Saquons, Alvin Kamara's, those are the guys you're going to be targeting first and second round. Well, clearly they're not going to be in the second round. The first round, you're targeting those guys. The second round, I'm thinking, Austin Eckler's, Nick Chubb's, Kenyon Drake's. Those are guys who I believe will slip to the second round of your draft. Joe Mixon will be in the second round, who I think will be a good pickup for the second round. And then in the third round, Todd Gurley I think will be a great pickup because if you look, Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's going around here, Chris Carson, Leonard Fournette. These are guys with a lot of potential, but I think Todd Gurley could finish just as well, if not better than these guys. Of course, my boy Clyde Edwards-Hilaire, I think he's going to pop off, but that's a different story. But David Johnson and Todd Gurley, guys you certainly want to pay attention to because Todd Gurley is a top dog in Atlanta right now. That's a high-powered offense. I understand that Atlanta hasn't been winning games, but Matt Ryan's no slouch. That offense is very, very good. They just underperform. I think they'll get their stuff together next season, and he's involved in the passing game. That's the biggest thing with these running backs, guys. If they're involved in the passing game, you gotta own them. Unless you're playing standard, of course, that changes things. But even then, they're getting yardage off of catching the football, and they're getting touchdowns off of catching the football. So these guys basically are priceless. David Johnson and Todd Gurley, because these are running backs that guys are down on because of their injury history, who I believe have a ton of potential to bounce back next season. I really think they're going to surprise a lot of people. So, with that, let's move on to the next one. Miles Sanders. No, this is not just because I live in Philly and I do have, a soft spot in my heart for the Eagles. This is because people are sleeping on Miles Sanders. Right now, he's going as the RB13, and I think he could very, very easily crack the top 10. Should guys like Aaron Jones have a surprise slump season, Josh Jacobs, have a sophomore slump. Miles Sanders, guys, only played half a season. Like, let's be real here. He played half a season last season and finished as RB15. For the first 8 weeks, he wasn't the feature back. He really wasn't the feature back. It wasn't until Jordan Howard really got hurt, basically the second half of the season, where he shined, and he finished with 1,300 total yards and 6 touchdowns. Do I need to say more? But I will. I don't need to, but I will. He's expressed that he's ready to be that feature guy. The Eagles have expressed that they are ready for him to be a feature guy. And, yes, there's been rumblings about them signing someone, but they haven't signed someone yet. And have they really done anything that causes concern for you to say, this guy might not be the top dog in that backfield, or they might run with a committee? I understand, the history that Philly has, and the tough challenge that is picking which running back you want to start if you have Eagles running backs. But next season is going to be different. I can guarantee you that Miles Sanders is going to be an absolute dog, and you guys are going to be upset if you pass up on him because you think that they're going to have some sort of committee. Listen, I respect Boston Scott, but Boston Scott at this point in time is nothing but a handcuff to Miles Sanders. I don't think he's a legitimate threat to touches. I don't think he's a legitimate threat to fantasy football value. A lot of people do, though, and they're kind of sleeping on him. I'm not saying RB13 is absolutely terrible, but if he finished as RB15 last season, playing basically only half a season, where he was the starter when he had the majority of the snaps, because he actually didn't have the majority of the snaps until after, I think it was week 8. That's when he started seeing 70% plus snaps in games. So if he finishes RB15 doing that, he certainly will be, or will have the potential to finish as a top 10 running back. So if you're getting this guy, on average right now, he's being drafted in the middle of the third round. Yeah, you're definitely going to want him. You're definitely going to want to take him. I mean, the value there is insane. I think, at that point too, all of the elite backs are gone, clearly, right? Derrick Henry, you get the first, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry. They're almost all guaranteed going in the first round. There are some that slip because people start taking wide receivers like Aaron Jones, Kenyon Drake, Nick Chubb. But when you're getting that far down, third, fourth round, a guy like Miles Sanders, certainly a guy you want to pay attention to. Again, another guy with huge PPR value if you're playing PPR, half PPR. Even if you're playing standard, guys, this guy had 500 yards receiving. So you're still getting those, 50 points, 50.9 points for just the receiving yards. He had 800 yards on the ground. That's, 1,300 total yards, 6 touchdowns. I think he's only going to improve on that, being the starter, being the full-time guy. And don't worry about Boston Scott, guys. I understand he had those huge games, but in week 17, you remember Miles Sanders went down. And, Boston Scott was just, it was just a flash. I think it's very fluky. I don't think he's actually, a legitimate threat to take the starting spot, because he's also been on the team for quite some time and hasn't done that while he was there. There's no legitimate threat to Miles Sanders. He's a young guy. I think he's ready for the role, and he is insanely productive. So keep your eyes on Miles Sanders, guys. He certainly is going to deliver and give you great value for where you're going to be picking him up at. For the last running back, you guys should definitely be paying attention to Le'Veon Bell. I think Le'Veon Bell is a must-own. I did mention him earlier. I think he's a must-own for next season, of course, after you have your starting guys. Le'Veon Bell, he has the potential to be, I think a lower-end RB1. He's going to be a high-end RB2 for sure. Last season, Le'Veon Bell had a horrible season by his standard for sure. 3.2 yards per carry, 789 rush yards, 461 receiving yards, and only 4 total touchdowns. It was abysmal. When you think about what Le'Veon Bell has been for the Pittsburgh Steelers, an absolute machine. He's had seasons averaging 20, 17 fantasy points per game, clearly an RB1, but last season was abysmal. I think he certainly bounces back from that. I think where you're going to be getting him right now at his ADP, he's being drafted as a RB19 at the start of round 5. So, I mean, come on. I mean, you're getting a guy who he's certainly going to be in the top 15 with the potential to bounce back to be closer to the top 10, maybe a top 12, top 11 back who could certainly play in your flex role. I think Le'Veon Bell is definitely going to have a big year. Not a big year, but certainly, not compared to, the Christian McCaffreys and Saquon Barkleys. But I think, with the Jets, they showed us they want to help that offensive line. In the draft, Le'Veon Bell has something to prove after, the falling out with Pittsburgh, coming to the New York Jets, really having a crappy year. He has a lot to prove. I think he bounces back in a major way. And again, the theme always with running backs is PPR value, because last season he had 66 receptions. Yes, he didn't have that many yards, but he's getting the catches. So Le'Veon Bell, 5th round, guys, is where you can snag Le'Veon Bell. Certainly going to be worth that pick. But with that is our last running back for the must-own running backs right now. Of course, I'll talk about more eventually, but pay attention to these guys. I think, they could certainly be game changers. And if they bust, you're getting them in the, the back of the early rounds, right? 4th, 5th rounds, you're not spending a ton on these guys. I think they're certainly worth that sort of risk, because in those rounds, you can make a mistake and still go, make a deep playoff run, possibly win the championship. I don't think, getting Le'Veon in the 4th or 5th round and him, not being top 10, but him being top 15, I don't think that's horrible, right? So I think the reward is certainly worth that risk. But with that, guys, we're going to go into our final break, and when we get back, wrapping up the show. So stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back after this short break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Alrighty, guys, welcome back. We are now entering the final segment of the show today, and with the final segment of the show, I want to do some in other news, and the reason I want to do that is because there are some important conversations that I think we need to have. The things that have been trending, of course, right now. The biggest thing that's trending is Patrick Mahomes' mega deal. Yes, that's exciting. It's fun. It's cool. It's awesome. Historic. But I want to talk about Desean Jackson. And by now, you may or may not have heard about the situation, but Desean Jackson has found himself in some very, very hot water. Basically, the Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver made some posts on social media that were extremely insensitive. Now, I didn't actually see the posts, when he made the posts. I'm not a guy who's super huge on social media. But anyway, I didn't see the posts, but of course, everyone has it cited. Everyone, screenshots, whatever. And so I want to, read basically the quotes that he quoted. Because he made a huge mistake, right? And basically, if you haven't heard, he quoted Adolf Hitler. I don't think Adolf Hitler could say anything, and you could quote it and it'd be acceptable, right? Because of the type of human being that he was, sort of evil that he just portrayed and just exuded. It's just unacceptable. Right, but the quote that he featured on his story, I don't know if it was this past weekend, or if it was Monday, but it said, basically, that white Jews will blackmail America. They will extort America. Their plan for world domination won't work, however, if the Negroes know who they were. I'll read it again, basically. White Jews will blackmail America. They will extort America. Their plan for world domination won't work if the Negroes know who they were. Well, to start, I want to give, or try to sort of understand Desean Jackson's thinking, right? Because I don't think that he did much thinking before posting it, and that's not a dig. That's just me being honest, right? People can be ignorant at times. And I think here, he certainly didn't think this one through. I'm not sure if he understood that he was quoting Adolf Hitler. It confuses me severely. That was an oversight of his because of the figure that Adolf Hitler is and what he represents in the history of the world. But, this was a big mistake. And I think the only reason that I can give that, might have made this acceptable for Desean Jackson in his mind to post this was he was trying to, he just liked the part of, if blacks in America know who they are, they cannot be extorted in America. It feels like this was a very selective reading where he just took pieces of it. He liked what it represented and he posted it. But he has to understand, this is Adolf Hitler, super anti-Semitic, and while you're trying to uplift one group, you are severely putting down another group, and that's just unacceptable. He didn't read through that. I don't know what kind of reaction he was expecting. Well, I know he was expecting, people to be like, Black America, and like, I'm, supporting him, but I think in his head, he was just thinking, look, even Adolf Hitler, recognized some sort of power that blacks in America had or have, and so I'm posting this, and it was just really not well received. It will never be received well. He didn't think it through. He also shared 2 other posts on Instagram supporting Farrah Khan, who's been identified as anti-Semitic. The posts, of course, have been deleted. I didn't see the posts. I'm sure you could find it online. The Eagles, though, released their statement, as of course they should. They say, "We have spoken with Desean Jackson about his posts. Regardless of his intentions, the messages he shared were offensive, harmful, and absolutely appalling. They have no place in our society and are not condoned or supported in any way by the organization. He says, they say, we are disappointed and reiterated to Desean the importance of not only apologizing, but also using his platform to take action to promote unity, equality, and respect. We are continuing to evaluate the circumstances and will take appropriate action. We take these matters very seriously and are committed to continuing to have productive and meaningful conversations with Desean, as well as all of our players and staff, in order to educate, learn, and grow. Desean Jackson has spoken with brass, Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, I'm sure. And this is a tough situation. There hasn't been, reports about suspensions or, cutting him. But I do think that honestly is on the table, right? The Eagles had a situation years ago with Riley Cooper, when he was caught on video saying a racial slur, but he got fined. And I think he got suspended for a week or something like that, or benched for a week, but it was something super, super, not appropriate punishment for what he said. And of course, had Riley Cooper said that, today, he would probably never play in the NFL again if he was caught doing that today. So the Eagles have set a bad precedent. And so I think that that's why I would say that suspension or, cutting him is on the table, right? Because, nowadays you have to set that standard. You have to send a message, right? In this political climate and, with everything going on, you have to show your staunch stance to defending, human rights, equality, things of that nature. One thing I do want to talk about, though, is that this is important because in Desean Jackson's apology, and I'll read some of it here. I want to apologize to the Jewish community, Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman, Doug Peterson, the Eagles, and our fans. I'll paraphrase some of it, for the insensitive and ill-informed post that I shared. My intention was to uplift, unite, and encourage our culture with positivity and light. Unfortunately, that did not happen. I unintentionally hurt the Jewish community in the process, and for that I am sorry. Now more than ever, we must work together to end discrimination of all types and against all people and communities. And I think that's what's very important. And it's an important thing to take out of this entire situation, right? People of all, listen, I'm not trying to, don't take this the wrong way at all, but everyone faces some sort of discrimination, right? And I think that's an important thing to take away from all this. Of course, my stance with everything that's going on, human rights and equality, but I think it is important to always remember, right, that everyone can be racist, everyone can discriminate against someone else, right? Racism has no bias of skin color, right? Which is an interesting thing to think about, because when you're racist, you're biased towards a certain skin color, but racism itself can be born and bred in anyone of any culture and any skin color, right? There are minorities who are racist against other minorities, right? There are minorities who are racist against white people. And so the one thing to take out and to keep in mind is that it is important to stop discrimination against everyone, right? We have to realize that it's more, it is about everyone in this world, and not just minorities. You don't have to be a minority to be discriminated against. I think as human beings, we should just stop, discrimination altogether. And I think this is an important takeaway. And I appreciate, that Desean Jackson has recognized this, because, the Jewish community is one that also suffers from a lot of discrimination and prejudices as well. And, of course, they're overlooked because they have white skin, right? A lot of people don't, when you see a white person, you don't think that person suffers or deals with discrimination, but it is very possible, no matter the skin color. So, very, very interesting situation and unfortunate situation that Desean Jackson has found himself in. I guess if I had to tie this into fantasy football, I would tell you that if he is cut, not much, value dipping from Carson Wentz. I still think he's going to do great. He did great without him last season. Boost to Jalen Reagor. And it feels weird even talking about fantasy football because it's not even important to, this situation. But I will give that insight. if Desean Jackson ends up off of the Eagles for this situation, it does boost Jalen Reagor. For any of you guys who are big on Jalen Reagor and what he's going to do this season, that would be a boost for him. But very unfortunate situation. He seemed sincere in his apology. I know I've stated before, these apologies always seem forced, and it's kind of tough to gauge them. But he seemed sincere, and he seemed like he was actually it was a call to action for him. So glad this was a learning experience for him. Unfortunate that it had to happen, but it is what it is. These things happen. It's important that we learn and grow from them. Okay, with the next piece of In Other News, quickly to wrap up this show, I want to talk about another polarizing figure, Colin Kaepernick, because it was announced that he's having a partnership with Disney to do sort of a documentary series, which to me is very, very interesting. I think this is a very, very cool opportunity because, Colin Kaepernick is a super, super huge figure in the NFL. No matter what you think about him, he is always in the headlines. He is always in the news, and I think this is very, very interesting. One that I'm certainly going to be watching. Certainly one that I'm going to be wanting to learn about. It's a documentary series, and I'm really interested in getting more detail because, of course, we all know about the Colin Kaepernick story and why he knelt and the subsequent events, that happened after that. But I would love to see, more in depth and hear much more from him about the whole experience after, being basically blackballed by the league and what he's gone through since then and his emotions and how, down he must have felt not being in the NFL. So it's very, very interesting. Something that I think is going, of course, to be all over, headlines and polarizing people. Dividing people, because it seems that everything nowadays is divisive. We've seen wearing masks become divisive and political. So very, very interesting. And just another point on Colin Kaepernick, I'm very, very interested to see what team he ends up on, because there are very interesting teams that could use him. Teams like the Titans, teams like the Texans, teams even like the Chiefs, teams who are all playoff teams, who I think would certainly be able to use Colin Kaepernick should their starters go down. I think a very intriguing team is the Tennessee Titans. However, they have a fan base who is one of the more Republican fan bases. And as we know, Republicans typically, more conservative folks aren't typically fans of Colin Kaepernick. And the Tennessee Titans, of course, will bring that into consideration when signing him. Of course, most people would like to see Colin Kaepernick on a team at this point, but that's the unfortunate reality. They're going to think about the business side of signing him, and should, fans stop watching or stop coming because they sign him, of course they're going to consider that. But I think as of right now, Tennessee is actually one of the best fits for Colin Kaepernick. The Texans as well. I do like the Chiefs. Basically, he needs to go to a team that has a solid starter, but not much depth behind that starter, right? So, of course, there are, almost every team has a starter, so he's not going to go anywhere and start. But there are several teams who are very, very thin at the backup quarterback position. So, certainly an interesting situation with him, but always interesting to talk about Colin Kaepernick and to think about the power his name and figure has, even though he hasn't played in the NFL for how long. I think that's very, very telling to the kind of person that he is and what he represents, and what he's done for social justice and for his community, the communities around him. So very, very interesting stuff. But with that, guys, we are going to end today's show. I want to thank you for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I want to ask that you follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at GSMC_F football. And, stay on the lookout for that Colin Kaepernick documentary. No matter how you feel about him, I think it's definitely going to be an interesting watch, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Stay safe, guys. Stay happy. Stay healthy. Protect yourselves. Protect your loved ones. Of course, be responsible if you're going out. I know a lot of cities and states have been really reopening. I've seen a lot of people, at least on my social media accounts, going out to eat, going out to the beaches. I'm not at that stage yet, but sure I will be eventually. With that, guys, have a good night, and we'll see you here next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.